Gangstas! What's up, guys? You're listening to what's likely to be the final WandaVision-oriented rectangular table discussion, as we've made it. It's the finale, and ultimately I was kind of disappointed in it. We speculated a lot about it, but we didn't end up getting any Nightmare or any Dormammu or any Chthon, at least as far as we can tell. Seems like we also haven't gotten Mephisto, but I have a slight theory on that we'll get to later. What were your thoughts on that last episode?
Superhero movies kind of don't know how to end themselves, and it's even worse when it's a show. There's no good way to end a show. It's kind of like when you beat a Final Fantasy game, and it's like all this build up and all this level grinding, and it's just like, oh, it's over. It's one thing when it's like you go to the movie and a couple hours later, it's like, okay, that was a thing. But then this show has been like stringing people along for week after week, and like everybody's been rabid with speculations and theories for weeks and weeks. So not all of that is going to pay off or come to fruition, but it did wrap up a thing. They are going to keep making shows into perpetuity. Things that they didn't seem like they're wrapping up now probably will come into play later.
I tend to agree that some of the disappointment, for lack of a better word, does come from a self-inflicted point of view. I definitely think I'm guilty of building up something that wasn't there. I think I was just a little overzealous in some of my thoughts, or maybe even just some of my hopes. I think I superimposed what I hoped would happen into thinking it was a certainty, when obviously that was never the plan all along. So I definitely agree with what you're saying, is some of the disappointment is self-inflicted. This is the finale for WandaVision, but at the same time, WandaVision was intended to be part one of a trilogy within Spider-Man No Way Home, or whatever it's called, and Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. So what was a season finale was really the final part of part one, which wasn't a finale of the trilogy, so to speak. Going back to what I said about the Mephisto thing, my first thought was this whole 9 episodes felt like a Rian Johnson subvert expectations, where the whole Evan Peters being cast was to make people automatically assume that it was somehow related to Quicksilver, or it was somehow related to multiple dimensions of the multiverse. Then, as it would turn out, or as it appears to be turning out, when Monica is trapped in the house, she just realizes that Evan Peters is actually the Ralph. I think you're meant to assume that his name being Ralph means that he was actually the husband of Agatha the whole time, or likely the Ralph that she had alluded to throughout the course of the show. However, that doesn't really explain how he can emulate Quicksilver's super speed. The one thing that I kind of noticed that makes me maybe think that it's going to be a subversion of your subverted expectations, there is credence to the fact that it could still maybe be Mephisto, because an average citizen wouldn't have super speed like Quicksilver, and the little necklace thing that we're meant to believe is how Agatha was mind controlling this pedestrian Ralph guy, I'm not buying it, because I don't think that necklace would give somebody super speed, and so I'm thinking that it could still possibly be Mephisto, who's had the nickname Ralph in comics in the past. That's why Evan Peters was able to super speed around in the room when Monica was there. I'm interested to see what you have to say about that.
I have a long shot theory that if Agatha is hundreds of years old, she can go around marrying people and having kids with people over the centuries and decades to try to create the perfect magical baby or whatever, kind of like Greek gods and goddesses did back in old school mythology. Agatha could have had some kids who had some kids who had some kids who then became Wanda and Pietro's parents. Agatha could have actually married a person named Ralph and like maybe imbued them with powers, or they had some kind of powers, or the amulet gave them powers or something. Or they could have like been experimented. They could have been experimented on by some high evolutionary at some point along the line and like gained super speed. Pietro could be getting the super speed genetically from some like distant grandparent that is this Ralph guy who has been like kept from aging and like kept like in like magical stasis by Agatha. And she just has all these people all over the world that are like her minions that she marries and maybe gives magical powers. So that could come into play later where like you find out that Agatha maybe in the MCU is some ancestor. She thought that she was supposed to be a Scarlet Witch, and that's why she's like noticing that how is this person over in New Jersey that can do all these things, and I can't. I want that power.
We're going to kind of jump to the very end. I wanted you to discuss the second. Well, actually, you can discuss the first end credit scene because you had a theory about that one that you wanted to talk about. So you can talk about that, and then I'll have you talk about the second one where there were two Elizabeth Olsens in the cabin. But you can talk about your scroll theory that you mentioned involving Darcy at the end.
Oh, Darcy was just kind of there and then kind of ran off, and they gave some like weak explanation of like, oh, she said that like debriefings are for the week and then just took off. So that like if she's in such a hustle to get out of there, that kind of lends credence to a theory that she could be some kind of Skrull or some kind of like double agent or spy or something.
I could maybe see that, but I just wrote it off as the Darcy sarcasm, and also just the fact that Kat Dennings probably just didn't have the real life schedule to film stuff at the end. I think she probably shot her scene where she rammed into Tyler Hayward in the same day or two as she shot her few scenes in the middle episodes of the show that she appeared in. I could maybe see that, though, because we did finally get more Skrulls besides Talos and whoever was playing Maria Hill. We had talked about Skrulls a lot, and we thought so many different people were Skrulls, and we did finally get one. That was one thing we kind of mentioned that vaguely came to towards the end. I think you have probably a better explanation for what went down in the second end credits scene that some people could maybe use a little bit more of an explanation as what was going on.
So that probably is Mount Wundagore, where like Wanda and Pietro are born. That's where the High Evolutionary lives, and that's where like Chthon is from, and that's where Chthon wrote the Darkhold, and Chthon marked Wanda and Pietro so that he could like use them as vessels, and like he's possessed them both. The two Wandas thing is like Doctor Strange does that, where he like projects astral forms of himself, and like Charles Xavier does a version of that with his mind. Or that could be the Mephisto / Chthon / the whatever, and like they're taking like a ghosty form of Wanda just so they could use the same actor or whatever. Real Wanda might not even see that. It's just like haunting the place and like looking on menacingly. And like the hearing this kid scream in the distance, that kind of indicates that like maybe that could be Mephisto, because Mephisto is a shapeshifter. And the kids are shards of Mephisto's soul. So Mephisto could be like looking out over different portions of timeline and realities for those kids to like track them down, kind of like the Eye of Sauron trying to track down the ring.
I did get a little bit of a Mephisto-y vibe at the end as well. The one that was looking through the book and when the screaming and stuff was going on.
Kind of had a sinister look, too, yeah.
I did kind of get a little bit of a Mephisto-y vibe from that, too. And, like, at the very end where there was, like, a flash of red, that kind of did seem a little Mephisto-y. So, yeah, if my Evan Peters secretly being Mephisto and the Ralph Easter egg connecting Ralph / Evan Peters to Mephisto, if there was ever going to be a Mephisto connection, I think it's definitely that or whatever that was at the end looking through the book. Now I kind of wanted to talk about a couple things that were kind of convoluted and I had a gripe with that went down in this episode. One thing that stood out that was kind of weird was I didn't really like any of the vision on vision interaction. The discussion in the library was kind of interesting, how they used allegory of Theseus's ship and how on a technicality they aren't really enemies because his programming is to destroy the original vision, but the vision that he's attacking isn't technically the original one, and it's like kind of subjective who's the real vision. So I got that. But what I didn't really like was how he kind of was able to do his thing where he kind of density shifted the mind of an AI, which isn't the same as the minds of the people he was awakening or whatever throughout the show. I thought that was kind of lazy and dumb and convoluted. I wasn't a big fan of that. And it was also kind of unclear which vision we were dealing with at the end. One of them was like, I'm the real vision or something like that, and then kind of blasted through the roof. And then we see a different vision go back out and join the fray. I think the vision that went back out to join the fray might have been the Wanda created one, and then White Vision, we don't exactly know where he is. He's probably, because he can obviously exist outside of the Wanda Dome. The other thing that I didn't like that was kind of convoluted and didn't make a lot of sense was when exactly Scarlet Witch created the runes. The whole thing with the runes didn't make a lot of sense to me because she was like throwing away her powers on purpose, but then supposedly you can't use powers if there are runes present. So it seems like Agatha shouldn't have been able to be fighting against her that whole time. That felt very convoluted to me. It felt very plot armory and plot convenient that all of a sudden the runes showed up and it's like, oh yeah, there are runes now, so I shouldn't be able to be using powers. Personally, I think that the runes had to have been created when she reinstated the bubble the second time. To me, that makes the most sense when she put them. You had a theory that when she was missing or chucking her mystic bolts or whatever, you had a theory that that's when they were put up, but Agatha was still doing magical counters when that was going on. So if that was the case when she put up the runes, Agatha couldn't or shouldn't have been able to do that. I think that was really bad writing, and I'm wondering if you have thoughts on that scenario.
Yeah, when you start dealing with magic stuff, it is kind of a cheat code for making up whatever plot-related rules you kind of need as you go along. That is a plausible explanation that she could have, like, put them on there when she re-sealed the decks. Or it could be like I feel like this happens in Batman a lot, where he's, like, throwing batarangs around randomly and, like, looking like he's about to lose, and then he's like, ha! I made a cat's cradle net of, like, batarang ropes, and now you're stuck in it.
Spider-Man kind of fights that way too.
Yeah. Whatever, like, lucky shot they need, it was like, oh, that's what I was planning this whole time. If she's more powerful than the Sorcerer Supreme, she can kind of, like, make up whatever power she wants too. She can make Agatha think she's, like, fighting back or something after a while.
I hope it isn't completely unclear what I was trying to say in that sort of miniature rant. Essentially, it just doesn't really make sense why Agatha would have been able to be doing all those countermeasures if the runes were there. It seems just like lazy writing again and plot convenience that, well, we need the episode to be wrapped up now and we need Agatha to be defeated, so we'll just have Scarlet Witch reveal the runes.
Yeah, I was impressed overall with WandaVision and all the twists and surprises and all, like, everything that they packed into it. They definitely, like, inundated people with fake outs and, like, meta gags, and it's cool that they made it is a pretty big involved art project that they did. So I hope that they're, like, all the shows are this cool like this going forward. So I think I've figured out what the thrust of the Falcon and Winter Soldier show is going to be, though. So Ultimatum is in the show, and Flag Smasher and his Ultimatum, like, Ultimatum is some, like, acronym, kind of like S.H.I.E.L.D. is, but they're, like, an anti-national, like, one world government terrorist group that, like, Captain America fought, And they later became like a Deadpool villain team, I think, because they're kind of hokey. So I think they're going to be like a made-up, contrived boogeyman that Thunderbolt Ross is going to make up to have this new Captain America. Oh, I think it's going to leak that like when Steve Rogers was like trying to get the scepter back or the suitcase back from Jasper Sitwell when he went back in time, he said Hail Hydra, which was a nod to the like Secret Empire storyline. But I think that's going to leak, and they're going to be like, oh, see, he was a traitor all along. We need a new Captain America that's like a real patriot that's going to stand up for us, blah, blah, blah. So they're going to get this John Walker guy to be their like fake corporate Captain America. They're going to make up this terrorist group that is like actors, but they're going to stage these like Saturday morning cartoony, like conspicuous terrorist acts for U.S. Agent to then come in and like heroically foil and like get caught on camera doing it. And Helmut Zemo's gonna be back. He's gonna cooperate with Thunderbolt Ross. He's gonna be like, of course, I hate superheroes too. I want to discredit those old Avengers. That's what I've been trying to do all along. And it's been like 5 years since like all the Civil War stuff happened at this, like more than 5 years. So they've been, I don't know if Zemo got snapped and put back, but like he's probably been stewing on it. So he's gonna like pose as this flag smasher guy initially, and then Sam and Bucky are gonna unwittingly foil one of these like staged plots because they happen to be in the area, and it's gonna like fumble up U.S. Agent. So that's how they're gonna catch on. But then they're gonna have to switch tactics, and then like Helmut Zemo is gonna put on his Cobra Commander mask. And then he's going to form another, like, fake, dastardly team of actors and call them the Masters of Evil. Songbird is heavily rumored to be, like, there's, like, a leaked photo of someone that looks like Songbird on the set. So Songbird was, like, a pro wrestler who, joined the Masters of Evil. So she's, like, an actor. They're probably going to give her, like, a jetpack like Falcon has instead of her, like, energy wings. So she'll be like the reverse Falcon on this like Masters of Evil team that like will justify Thunderbolt Ross coming up with his own super team called the Thunderbolts to fight these Masters of Evil guys, and then Helmut Zemo will eventually wrest control from Thunderbolt Ross of the Thunderbolts.
It sounds like your favorite part of the WandaVision show was what everybody hated about the Rian Johnson Star Wars. Constant plot twists and subverted expectations and, as you put it, essentially fake outs. It sounds like you love that about WandaVision when most people absolutely...
Because I think WandaVision did it well. That Star Wars movie did it lazily. They weren't like trying to do plot twists. They just mishmashed 8 scripts together, it felt like.
Yeah, and like obviously WandaVision has had a plan. The MCU is a very calculated thing that they've had in mind for years and years, so that's true that they probably have a lot more resources going into it, but they also have just a lot more intelligence in their plan.
I think the Marvel Universe going forward is gonna like have to inundate, because they know that there's a rabid fan base who's like wildly speculating on everything and like scouting for everything and like detectiving for everything. I think this, like, the next Spider-Man movie, and, like, it's been, like, confirmed that they give Tom Holland fake information to give everybody, and, like, Mark Ruffalo now fake information, because they don't want them to spoil anything. They're trying as hard as they can to keep everybody on their toes. Some of the, like, rumors and speculation about this, like, Spider-Man movie even, maybe, like, there's, like, oh, Childish Gambino is on the set, we're gonna have Prowler in this movie, and, like, oh, they're bringing back the other Spider-Man actors? We're bringing back all these other people from the past franchises. They might be back, but, like, not even as the same characters. They might be taking, like, extra set photos and, like, having people come onto the set for, like, extra scenes to, like, throw people off so that they won't know what to expect.
What I think would actually be hilarious is if they had Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield cast as Eddie Brock or something instead. Similar to what it looks like they're trying to pull with this WandaVision, where it's like, yeah, Evan Peters was cast in the MCU, but he was cast as Ralph Bonner, or Boner, whichever way you want to pronounce it. Like I said, he might actually secretly be Mephisto, but at face value right now, it appears like that was just a subverted expectations move, where, yeah, the actor Evan Peters, who we know from 20th Century Fox as Quicksilver, was cast as pedestrian and possible slave of Agatha. Going back to some of your thesis about the upcoming Falcon and Winter Soldier, one thing I was thinking about as you were talking, I'm not sure if there's comic storyline to back this, but do you think it's possible that because Helmut Zemo is in it, do you think it's possible that he will re-trigger with the Hydra brainwashing of Winter Soldier and make him a part of the Masters of Evil? And so we think it's this big Winter Soldier Falcon team up, but it's actually Winter Soldier as a villain like he's been in the comics in the past. And we're actually getting Winter Soldier as a villain long term over the course of the show. Do you think that could possibly be a thing?
I do think that they could do something like he's secretly got the book and he could like brainwash him in the middle of a fight, so like they go in thinking that they're on the same team, and then he like flips him halfway through the fight, so that he's then now fighting Falcon and fighting the good guys. They'll probably turn him back by the end, and like snap him out of it by the end of the series, but that is a thing that they could do.
The other thing I'm kind of thinking about as I say that, to a counterpoint to my own theory, did the Wakandans experiment on him, or did they like do medical things to like undo some of the stuff that Hydra did? And we don't necessarily know how deep-seated the Hydra brainwashing is. Like, they might have ways to trigger him regardless of if he had a bunch of therapy in Wakanda. But I did just think about that, how he spent a ton of time in Wakanda and they were calling him White Wolf or something like that. I don't know if he was undergoing a bunch of treatment to undo some of the Hydra stuff. So I just thought of that as a counterpoint. But I think it would be interesting, and it would be a way to make Winter Soldier a villain and sort of Easter egg his time as a villain in the comics, even though it was fairly brief. I think that's something that most people aren't expecting, because based on the trailers and stuff, it seems like it's a big team-up show the whole time. But I think it's going to be similar to what they did with Star Wars, where most of the trailer was pretty much like episode 1, and then everything in the actual show is a mystery. I think Winter Soldier and Falcon are going to start as allies, and I think they're going to be thrown to the fire in a situation where they accidentally foil some kind of setup, or somehow or other they end up having to jump into action. And I think a lot of what we saw in the trailer is probably that which you alluded to. And then I'm thinking that the real meat of the show is possibly going to be Winter Soldier as a part of the Masters of Evil, or part of the Thunderbolts, even.
So this is something far-fetched, but another thing that they could do is have like a surprise celebrity cameo and have like Ben Kingsley come back as the actor that played a terrorist before, reprising his role as an actor playing a terrorist on this new terrorist team.
This kind of shifts gears a little bit, but I'm kind of surprised this didn't come up before. Being that WandaVision was like a 9-episode arc that's kind of similar to Mandalorian, and that Mandalorian's an 8-episode arc, I wanted to ask you, which show do you prefer and why? Which one do you like better?
I'm a Marvel person more than a Star Wars person. I think I like WandaVision better just because of how like all the unexpected and like gimmicky, I guess, is kind of like a loaded bad connotation, but like I liked all the unexpected and gimmicky stuff that they did with superheroes.
What you're kind of saying is you have a foundation of bias because
That
you've grown up more reading Marvel stuff. I was talking, I guess, off air, for lack of a better term, with somebody recently. I was saying how I don't dislike Marvel by any means. Obviously, I love it. I wouldn't do this show about it if I didn't, but I think I kind of like Star Wars a little more, and I think part of it is because it's easier to know a lot about it. One of the kind of appeals of Star Wars is that there isn't any prior source material. A lot of people take issue with the Marvel stuff because a lot of the movies change things that happened in the comics. Therefore, it's different than the quote-unquote source material, and for accuracy purposes, people take gripes with it, and I've found myself doing that as well. Meanwhile, with Star Wars, the movies kind of are the source material. It's really just like, do you like it from the standpoint of an action movie or a drama movie or just like a movie in general? The canon is kind of unfolding as new movies come out. Whereas with Marvel, they're basing their canon on a source material, and so it's easier to have issues with it because there are decades and decades of source material that they're either ignoring or changing. I find that annoying at times, and I know there are other people that probably dislike that as well. So that's one thing that Star Wars has going for it, where a lot more people, especially nowadays, like to watch stuff instead of actually reading things. So with Star Wars, you don't necessarily have to have read a ton of stuff prior to understand the gist of it, and it's a lot easier to be familiar with the story because you can watch it, and then the more you watch stuff, you're learning the canon the same as everybody else. There are comics and stuff, but the general timeline and canon mostly happens in movies, and then TV shows as well kind of fill in the gaps, but it's a lot easier to follow Star Wars and be really knowledgeable on it.
I think a lot of people got agitated when they decanonized all the books and all the existing canon for Star Wars.
And to Star Wars' credit, they are kind of reintroducing a lot of the EU stuff. They sort of reimagined Thrawn a little bit. The rendition we're seeing in things like Rebels, and hopefully he gets brought to the big screen as well into live action. But yeah, that kind of went off into a Star Wars tangent. Yeah, I was just kind of curious. I kind of figured you would prefer the Marvel thing, just because I know you're so much more entrenched in that world. And Marvel does have the advantage of, at the same time, so much source material that gets ignored can lead to problems, but at the same time, there's so much source material to make movies and future content too. Its biggest strength is sort of its biggest weakness in that regard.
I will say this about Marvel, and like DC would be even. And I've always been more of a Marvel person than a DC person. Reading some of the old comics is like listening to classic rock, where like there are cool concepts and everything, but like it doesn't hold up well, and it's like clunky and dated, and it's like kids listening to like Bad to the Bone when it came out probably thought it was like the coolest thing. That's how a lot of the older Marvel comics are. So like the movie franchise, or like the movie end of it, is a good, and they've tried to like reboot things, and like the movies are a good way to like streamline and like maybe rework and like modernize some of the dated concepts of the old comics too.
Yeah, we kind of talked before, not on the podcast, about how they're kind of making J. Jonah Jameson a podcast host instead of the Daily Bugle paper, because the paper is a thing of the past, or is becoming more and more obsolete. It's more, we're moving more towards digital media and social media era. So they're kind of incorporating some of the modern things into what were somewhat outdated concepts at the time. The photography style of Peter Parker from the classic comics isn't necessarily how people do things anymore. People have so much power with just a smartphone.
Even reading comics from like the 80s and like early 90s, when like cell phones weren't really a thing that everybody had, it's like kind of kooky that they're like just running into each other now and like, oh, well, how can I trust you? I haven't seen you for a year. Those plot lines couldn't even work now because we all have Batman belts essentially on our phones that we all carry around with us all the time, that we can log into the universal hive mind of the internet and like look up anything we want and like see pictures of anything we want and like track anybody we want essentially. So yeah, they have to update things for the movies or for anything.